Hi, today I want to show you how to debug Node.js in Visual Studio Code and JavaScript in Chrome browser. Let me show you what I mean by debugging. For example, take a look at this JavaScript code embedded in my HTML code, and what happens in this code is that whenever I press this button, this function gets executed. But I don't want to execute the entire function all at once. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to press a breakpoint by just clicking on this area which is called gutter. And what happens is that instead of executing the entire code, JavaScript engine is going to stop right on this line. Let me show you. 1, 2, 3, click. You see that? Everything has been executed up to this point. So next, if I want to execute this line, I'm going to click on this guy. And as you can see that because this line of code has not been executed, the current value of this variable xhttp is undefined. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just execute one line of my JavaScript code. Done. And if I hover my mouse, you see that the current value has changed. Similarly, for the Node.js code, I want to be able to do the same thing in Visual Studio Code. And the reason is that Node.js is actually JavaScript code running in desktop environment or running in server environment. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing right over here. So I wanted to execute this code line by line. So I head over to run menu right here, and I'm going to start debugging, and I'm going to select the Node.js engine. And as you can see, everything has been executed up to this point. That means the current value of R is 20. And if I execute this line, you will see something new at the console. So let me show you. This is how I debug line by line, or this is how I execute line by line. Click, and you see that this line has been executed, and you see the current value appeared at the debugging console. So if I execute this line, the current value of R will change. It will change to something new. So now let's dive into how we can do all of this. Okay, before doing any of that, for our Node.js environment, we have to download Node.js, right? So I'm going to select this, head over to this line, and I'm going to select the LTS, recommended for you folks, because this is stable version. Click on that, obviously download it, and depending on what platform you have, what operating system you have, you're going to make the right selection. And because I'm using Microsoft Windows and my Windows is 64-bit, I'm going to click on this, download this, execute this file, and install it on my machine. I'm going to say next, select this, next, and this is where I want to install my Node.js. Next, next. Obviously you need to read, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I just want to make it quick. I'm just waiting for this to finish. Okay, now that the installation is finished, let's verify if the Node.js has been installed successfully. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to open the command prompt. You can click on this and type cmd if you're in Windows, and here I'm going to say node-v. Perfect. So I got this version 14.17.0, and this is exactly what I've downloaded. So we are good with the Node.js installation. So next is to install the Visual Studio Code. So in order to download that, I'm going to say vsc download. I'm going to select this guy. And obviously I'm going to select the Windows and 64 version, and this is really very easy to install, so I'm not going to repeat that again over here. Okay, what I just did, I created a very simple application sending AJAX calls from HTML pages to the Node.js server. So I have created a very simple Node.js server right here. What I mean by server means HTTP server. I assume that you're familiar with Node.js. If not, that's okay. You can just copy my code as it is. And what I do here is that if I send a request to the port number 88 8888 on this machine, then this guy will be executed. This part of the code will be executed, and it is going to send this response back to the requester. That means to the client. So what I'm going to do, just to test this without the AJAX call, I'm going to go ahead and open the browser and type this localhost, which is this machine, port number 8888. And if I press that, then this part of the code will be executed, provided my application is still up and running. But as of now, the application is not running. So if I press this and try to open this server on this port number on this machine, let's see what happens. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to press enter. See that? There is nothing currently running on that port number. So as a result, you don't get anything back. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run my application at this moment, and I'm going to put my application in debugging mode. So this is a very simple Node.js application, like I showed you at the very beginning. I showed you another sample at the very beginning of this video. Here, I'm going to press a breakpoint right here inside this function, right? I'm going to also put another breakpoint right here, again by clicking on the gutter right on this end. And that means if I start my application is going to execute this line of code. I mean the V8 engine actually that runs the Node.js or runs the JavaScript on the server side. It is going to execute this line of code, then this line of code, and for this area it's going to wait for the client or wait for somebody to send a request to this port number. Otherwise, nothing is going to execute this part. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just put a breakpoint right here because the purpose of this video is just to show you how to debug. And I'm going to go ahead and select run, start debugging, select the engine, which is Node.js, and you can see that it's going to stop right here. And because I have not executed this line, as you can see on the HTTP, there is nothing. So this is a variable, this is a JavaScript variable, there is nothing in it. But if the moment that I execute this line using this panel here, see that? Step over. So I click that, and that line has been executed. If I want to execute the rest of the code up to the point that it reaches the next breakpoint, I'm gonna click on this guy, which says continue. So let me go ahead and do that. You can also at the same time do F5 in Windows or some other command keys in other operating systems. Because as you can know, Visual Studio Code is cross-platform application. Anyways, I'm going to click on that, and it is going to execute all of these lines up to this point. 1, 2, 3, go. You see that everything has been executed, especially this, the definition of this function has been created up to this point. And if I execute this line, it's going to write some messages at the console. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to execute everything. Obviously, this part is not going to be executed because nobody has sent any request to this port number yet. 1, 2, 3, go. So you will see that if I run this request on this port number on the browser, this line will be hit and my application will blink. Let me show you. So I'm gonna, as you can see, it is still running because I can see this sign over here. So if I want to pause my application, I'm gonna be clicking on that. So I'm gonna go back to my application. I mean, just the browser, because I'm just testing the backend at this moment. I'm gonna press enter. You see that the moment that I press enter, the control comes to the server side. That means everything has been executed up to this point. So this line of code has not been executed. So what is inside this variable res? You can see that if I hover my mouse, you can see the current variable of res. You can also use the watch window to see what are the current values of other variables at the same time. For example, I'm interested in seeing the value of HTTP, so I'm gonna type HTTP and press enter, and then the value will be visible to me. Now I'm going to execute everything right here. And how would I execute everything from this point to the point that the next breakpoint will hit? Obviously, you remember that by clicking on this. So if I execute everything, this response will be sent back to the client. So we should be able to see something right here. So let me show you. 1, 2, 3, go. And if I go back to that, you see that server's response. So this is how I could debug my Node.js code. I put the breakpoint right here, and I could execute line by line or everything. And the reason that you see here something happening here, because I had click this, or I press enter multiple times. So this is another, sorry, there is another request happening right here. So I'm going to stop my application right here, and this time I'm going to be incorporating the browser-side scripting into our experience. So if I go ahead and open the other tab, which is this one, this is actually the source. This is actually our client-side script. So this is the client side. How would I know this is client side? Obviously, this is HTML, right? So the browsers understand HTML. And inside my HTML code, I have created this button. As you can see, the button type is button, and onClick is my func, and my func will be executed the moment that this event gets triggered, like onClick. So this line of code, this area will be executed, and the whole thing is actually an AJAX call using get method to this server that we have just created. Remember that I used the port number 8888 right on the server-side scripting language that I used. And that means that I'm sending an AJAX call to the server, right? And this time I'm using the browser, this time I'm using a client scripting language such as HTML and JavaScript. So this time, instead of doing everything on the browser side address bar, I'm going to be doing that inside the HTML. Let me show you the source code. In fact, let me show you the tool that I can do the debugging of the on the client side. So in order to open that tool, you click on this guy right here, go to the more tools and developer tools. At the same time, you can click you can type in Control plus Shift plus I, or simply F12. So I executed that feature. I opened that feature, the Google Developer Tools, and in order to see the source code, I click on the Sources tab. You see that? Console. On the console, if I say, for example, let g equal 9, you can, on the console, this is exactly what happens on the console.log. So whatever you do, the result of console.log will appear here. But I want to see what is exactly happening inside my source code, and I want to be able to execute my source code line by line. And again, same thing that I showed you at the very beginning of this video. In order to place breakpoints here, all you need to do is something very similar to what you did in Visual Studio Code. In Visual Studio Code, this is client side, we cannot debug it on the server side. This is the server side. So in order to place a breakpoint, this is how you did it. This is how you toggle breakpoint. Click, click. So if I click, it appears. If you click, it disappears again. So I just put it back. And what I'm going to do is that I want to do the same thing right here. So I just click on this number 14, and then I execute my code. Obviously, if I execute my code, everything will be executed up to this point. So in fact, I'm going to put it on the line 15 so that the line 14 will be already executed. Let me do that. 1, 2, 3, go. You see this? This line has been executed already. That is, the reason is that this value has been updated. So what about the server side? Is the server running? No. Unfortunately, my server is not running yet, but who cares? Let's give it a try and see what happens. So I'm going to resume the rest of the code by clicking on this or continue. Let's see what happens. So in fact, the AJAX call will be sent to the server, which is not up and running. No problem. Click. There was nothing back from the server because the server was dead. You see this error message? Failed to load resource or ERR connection refused. No problem. I have no problem with that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run my server in debugging mode. So instead of going to the command prompt and execute your application, you want to execute your application in Visual Studio Code environment. So what I'm going to do, same thing, run, start debugging, select the engine, go. So everything has been executed up to this line. I don't like these guys anymore. I just want to focus inside this function, run. So everything has been executed and the application is listening to the port number 8888. And that means if I send another request to the server, by the way, this is from our previous request, that AJAX request that we sent to the server. And because the server was down, we did not see anything coming. So I'm going to click on this guy again. So this time, the moment that I resume this line of code, line 15, this request will be sent to the server. Let me actually execute everything up to this point. See that? Everything has been executed up to this point. Now I'm going to continue sending requests to the server by execution of the rest of the code. So the moment that I click this one, you will see that my server-side scripting will blink. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, go. You see this? My server-side scripting, that means the execution has been completed up to this point. You see this? It took a little bit of time because I'm running so many applications at the same time on my machine, and there are so many things happening under the hood. So everything has been executed up to this point. And you can see that I can hover the mouse, and like the example that I showed you at the very beginning of this video, you don't have to insert console.log, console.log, console.log just to see the current value at any moment of your code. Using this debugging tool, you can execute your application line by line. You can pause, you can resume, you can do anything you want in order to understand what went wrong with your application. So I'm going to execute the rest of the code, and the moment that I execute the rest of the code, you will see that something changes here. So what changes is this response that you see here. You see, this response will be displayed on the console. On the console, there is nothing, and this is from my previous activity that I just wanted to tell you what is happening at the console.log. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to execute this guy, and the response will be received by this function. This is an event which will be triggered if the server responds something back to the client. So I'm going to remove these guys. I don't need them. And again, this is from our previous attempt, but because I did not refresh the browser, because I did not press F5 in the browser, this guy is still here. But this is from the previous attempt. So what happens is that my prediction is that if I execute the rest of the code, just like that, that means if I send a response back to the client, this function will be executed and everything will be executed up to this line of code. So this time, if I execute this line, the browser will blink. Last time, the Visual Studio code was blinking. 1, 2, 3, go. You see that? The browser is blinking because from the server, the control goes back to the client. Because, like I said, this function, by the way, I'm using like pure JavaScript AJAX calls or vanilla JavaScript AJAX calls because I really want to know what is happening under the hood. Because if you don't know the AJAX call, what happens is that the server gets back to you multiple times. The first time that the server gets back to you, to your response, the server says, I received your request. The second time the server says, I'm about to process your request. And the last time the server says, your response is ready and good to go. So what happens is that I'm going to execute this line of code. See that the first time that this function was executed was because the server said, I just received your request, and this is what you see here. Let me go back, and as you can see, there was nothing. The response was there was nothing back from the server. This is the second time the server says, now I'm about to process your request. Let me go back to the console. Nothing there. Oh, the server is response. So I made a mistake perhaps somewhere, but basically this is what happened. So if you study that further, you will realize what I'm talking about. And the last time, everything will be completed, right? And if I go back to the console, the server's response was printed twice because of what I said. The first time there was no response, and it has been the server responded back to us three times. So you will see that What we do is that we are going to be looking at the ready state. The ready state has to be 4. That means the server, we check the ready state. The ready state is 2 when the server says, I received your request. This is what the server says to the client. The ready state becomes 3. The server says, I'm about to process your request. By the way, this is what? This is a client-side application. So the client receives the response from the server and checks the ready state of the response, which has come from the server. And when the ready state is 4, that is when the server has gotten back to you with some response. That means inside this object there is something. But I did not do that for this code snippet because I just wanted to make it short and brief. Otherwise, you will have to wait for the ready state to be 4 and then display the message. Obviously, this means that everything was good, your request was good, and the server was good. So I'm pretty sure you know these HTTP codes, what 2xx means, what 3xx means. But the purpose of this demonstration today was to show you how you can debug your code. Hopefully that was helpful to you. So as you can see, the debugging was that easy. I just summarized everything. So we use the Google Developer Tools, and in order to place breakpoint, we just click on this, and then we use this tool. See that? We use this tool right over here, and you can see the this guy right here only after you execute your code. And then if you want to go to the next line, you just click on this. If you want to execute everything up to the next breakpoint, you're just going to do this. And on the server side as well, same thing happens. So on the server side, this is actually a different script, the different sample that I'm using here, but it's very similar concept. So right over here, just opening the run, and then run, start debugging, select Node.js, and everything will be executed up to this point, and you can use this nav bar to navigate to the next line or everything up to the next breakpoint. Hope you found it helpful.